Missouri set to take on Ohio State in the Cotton Bowl, and I'm going to make the case that the Tigers should actually be favored over the Buckeyes, plus a solid victory over Wichita State for basketball as they gear up for Kansas, and why I think Florida State truly got hosed. All this and more right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. And obviously some great news, in my opinion, if you're a Missouri fan yesterday. The Tigers, of course, heading to the Cotton Bowl to play Ohio State. And I think, from my perspective, this is win-win. Obviously, a relatively easy destination for Missouri fans to get to, and a great opponent as well. A big-time name opponent, not somebody you've played a lot or in recent years. You know, obviously, Texas would have been an interesting opponent if the college football playoff situation had played out a little bit differently. But again, we had played Texas in the last few years. It's been 25 years since Missouri played Ohio State. They had a home and away series with the Buckeyes all the way back in 97 and 98. I remember attending that game all the way back in 97. This was, of course, pre the flea kicker game. This was a September non-conference football game. So really, this was as big of a crowd, certainly a non-Nebraska crowd, that I could remember at that point in my time as a young fan, for sure, to the point where I remember getting some people behind me going, "Hey, sit down in front," that type of thing. Just there weren't enough people in the crowd, generally speaking, to tell somebody for somebody to care if I was sitting down or not, my seventh grade self at that point. But anyway, regardless, obviously the Buckeyes just made a tremendous impression on the football field that day. Memorably, Andy Katzenmoyer with a massive hit on Corby Jones. Tigers didn't really compete in that football game that day, but in 98, well, Tigers took the trip to Ohio State, actually trailed in that ball game by just a point at halftime. Actually, they led the game 14-13 before, well, getting frankly dominated in the second half of that ball game. That 98 season, 4 losses for Missouri, all of them in which they led at halftime. So a really interesting team, tremendous team. Corby Jones, Devin West, their last seasons as Tigers, but Justin Smith's first season as well. But again, back to the modern stuff. Here's what we really want to talk about, right? Missouri and Ohio State this season. Well, I was at the basketball game yesterday watching Missouri take on Wichita State, and when this news broke in the basketball stands where I was sitting, I heard somebody say, actually, the line to open up at 8 points. I haven't been able to confirm that, but I definitely confirmed that some Missouri fans were able to get Missouri is 6.5-point underdogs currently over at FanDuel Sportsbook. Ohio State now a 3.5-point favorite over Missouri. That seems a lot more reasonable to me. When it was more than a touchdown, again, haven't confirmed the 8 there, just heard that one in the stands, but 6.5 to me, just way too much. If you're one of those people who jumped on that opening line early, good for you, because I think you can make a pretty strong case that the Tigers should be favored in this ball game. Eli Drinkwitz said that he expects everyone basically to suit up for this ball game. He's not expecting any opt-outs whatsoever. Now, Chad Bailey has been ruled out for the rest of the season with injury. It's quite possibly Ennis Rakestraw will sit out this game with an injury as well. But I think Rakestraw being from the state of Texas, by the way, I think he absolutely would want to suit up in this ball game. But I don't know if I were advising him, if he had a questionable injury that could hinder him maybe into the pro process, the draft process, the combine, whatever it might be this spring, well, I might advise him to sit this one out. If he's a healthy guy, though, yeah, give it a go for sure. Sounds like Tyron Hopper is going to play as well, although, again, his injury status a little bit more up in the air too. So we'll have to keep an eye on Hopper and Rakestraw in particular. Now, on the other side of the field, though, it seems like Ohio State might have quite a few opt-outs indeed, including, well, Kyle McCord, their starting quarterback this season, announced he's entering the transfer portal. Now, I suppose he could technically still end up starting this game for Ohio State. Eli Drinkwitz mentioned that guys who have entered their name into the portal have the option of playing in this ball game as far as he's concerned. Now, just to be clear, I don't expect that to be the case for Kyle McCord, but I suppose anything is possible. On the other hand, you've got guys like Marvin Harrison Jr., who could quite possibly be as high as the second pick in the draft. Certainly, I think he's going to be a top 5, at the very worst, a top 10 pick in this coming NFL draft at receiver. There's a guy who almost seems certain to opt out of this football game. Just not really a lot of juice for him in this particular ball game like it is for Missouri. Missouri, if you're a senior on this team, even if you're going to the NFL, you're somebody like Ennis Rakestraw who has eyes on the NFL, somebody like Cody Schrader who has eyes on it, trying to get drafted or going the undrafted route, whatever it might be. This is a kind of a dream come true for these guys. They were fighting for a 10-2 season, whereas Ohio State basically, hey, you lost to Michigan. You didn't make the college football playoff. Those were basically your two big goals, along with winning, of course, the Big Ten championship as well. Well, as great as Ohio State was this season, they were 0 for 3 on that. And I just think motivation-wise, I think it's going to be a really tough spot for the Buckeyes and an advantageous one for Missouri. And really, while Ohio State and probably Oregon would have been my preferred opponents, I'm just glad that Missouri avoided Liberty. That just wouldn't have been a lot of fun. Whether it would have been Tulane, if Tulane had won their conference championship, it's nothing really against Liberty or Tulane per se, or whoever it is and whoever it would have ended up being from that group of 5 spot. There's just not any upside for Missouri, because whether it's fair or unfair, Missouri wins that game. Well, you were expected to beat the group of 5 team. On the other hand, if you lose that game or even win a close one, well, the rest of the group of 5 teams are sort of snickering at you, just like the classic old school SEC teams like to find every excuse to sort of dismiss Missouri on some level, it would seem. So Ohio State certainly is the opposite of that. That's the, one of the biggest name programs of all time, the bluest of blue bloods. And nobody is going to sit here and say that Missouri is expected to win this game, although that's the national perspective. I'm telling you, I do kind of expect Missouri to win this game as we sit here today. Again, I think Missouri's roster is going to be more intact, and I think they're going to have more motivation as well. Of course, those two things sort of go together. Again, really, there's not much to complain about here, unless you're a Missouri fan that maybe happened to have gone to the 2013 Cotton Bowl, or I guess January 1st, 2014 Cotton Bowl. Maybe you've already been to AT&T Stadium. Maybe that's slightly disappointing, I suppose. Maybe you would have preferred Fiesta Bowl. Fair enough, but still, AT&T Stadium, great venue, relatively easy for Missouri fans to get to. I just don't see how, of all the outcomes, this was about as good as it can get. But I'm guessing Eli Drinkwitz and his staff didn't celebrate too hard yesterday, considering today the transfer portal window is now officially open for the next 30 days. So not exactly a lot of time to rest in the world of college football these days. So let's talk about the portal and also a nice win, another nice victory by the Missouri basketball team yesterday. Definitely another encouraging sign, I would say, for Dennis Gates and his squad. But you know what, before we get there, let's talk about LinkedIn Jobs, because when you're hiring for your small business, you want to have as many top-tier candidates as possible to interview. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. And thankfully, with LinkedIn, the process is intuitive, quick, and easy. LinkedIn knows that's why small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time and resources to hire. Well, they just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions even better, by the way, making the process even easier and quicker. You don't need another hat to put on. LinkedIn Jobs takes care of all of that for you. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And by the way, news just broke here as I'm recording on this Monday morning that Mizzou has already sold out of its ticket allotment for the Cotton Bowl. So if you're looking to get down there, you're going to have to find a different way to get tickets, secondary market, something like that. Hey, the Game Time app. Yeah, there you go. Now we're talking. Use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your next purchase. But obviously, that shows that Missouri fans are really, really excited for this ball game. In fact, more news here. Ohio State now just a 2.5-point favorite over at FanDuel Sportsbook. I think the nation is starting to catch on to the fact that really maybe Missouri should be the favorite in this ball game the more you look at all the different factors. But more to the point of the future for Missouri just a little bit here. As I said, Tyron Hopper questionable with his injury still coming up. Chad Bailey already been ruled out here by Eli Drinkwitz for the rest of the season. Well, Carmicah Glass, another linebacker entering the transfer portal for Missouri. That's actually 4 linebackers, including Glass now, along with Damian Wilson, Xavier Simmons, and also DJ Wesolak, if you include him as a linebacker. He seemed to bounce back and forth between linebacker and defensive end in his time practicing with the Tigers. But that just shows you that a lot of work to do for the Tigers, I think, defensively in the portal this season. Obviously, there's going to be some spots, offensive line, running back in particular on offense, but I think Missouri's offense should be pretty darn good once again next season. As good, if not better, than it was this past season. Obviously, Missouri is going to miss Cody Schrader, to be sure. But I just think one more year of Luther Burden and Brady Cook together in this system, number one, just Cook in general. I think experience at quarterback means so much. Him just having the full confidence of this program and this team now and this fan base, I think, for an entire offseason, this whole season of experience, I think, is just going to be nothing but great for Cook in this offense. But defensively, hey, if I'm going to say all season that Ennis Rakestraw and Chris Abrams-Drain are kind of the secret sauce of this defense, Darius Robinson going to be gone, lots of guys to replace, that's worrisome. It really is, without a doubt. So what this Missouri defense is going to look like, I think, is going to depend a lot on what happens in the transfer portal here, not just over the next month, but obviously it can continue well into the offseason here in the portal. Now, as for Missouri basketball, I can remember in the waning days of the Quinn Snyder era, a running joke with me and my friends and my parents and people who follow Missouri basketball was that, darn it, Missouri just needs to find themselves, because it seemed like that's what Quinn Snyder would say in his post-game comments after every disappointing Missouri loss toward the end there. The Tigers just hadn't quite found themselves. Well, in all seriousness, I think Missouri really has found itself here over the last 2-3 ball games or so. Now, just how good they are, that's the question. I think we'll have a pretty good idea of that over the next 3 or 4 ball games or so. Obviously, Missouri did not trail yesterday against Wichita State. Got off to a great start defensively. The Shockers just couldn't really find a good shot. Turned the ball over quite a bit early. And again, I think if you're an everydayer, you've heard me say this a lot at this point, but it's worth repeating. I think this team has to lean much more on its size in the middle and just its defense in general than the Tigers did last season. Of course, last season, the Tigers were much more of a spread it out, run and gun type of team that leaned on one excellent offensive player in Kobe Brown, who is obviously very versatile and can do a million different things to the point where he played himself into the NBA draft. Well, this season's Missouri team in that 5 spot, instead of having Kobe Brown, now you've got Connor Vanover, you've got Jordan Butler, and I think to a lesser extent, I think Aiden Shaw, one of those guys has to be in the game at all times, and that's basically how Dennis Gates has played it the last couple ball games. I think he's come to this conclusion, him and his whole staff have come to this conclusion as well. And what that really does is not only defensively has it made Missouri a real problem at the rim. The 7'5" Vanover is obvious. Aiden Shaw has become a menace defensively. He's actually 5th nationally in terms of block percentage on this relatively young season here so far. So not only has Missouri been much better defensively, leaning on those rim protectors, but also I think offensively, it's given them another option other than just, essentially passing the ball around the perimeter and hoping 3-pointers drop in. Because now, unlike last season, yes, Kobe Brown, an outstanding player, he was not an above the rim player. Well, now all 3 of those guys I just mentioned are above the rim players. Aiden Shaw is impressive of a dunker as you're ever going to see, a rim runner. Jordan Butler, obviously at nearly 7 feet tall, can play above the rim as well. And Connor Vanover, obviously you can just throw it near the rim at times, and it's the easiest shot in the world for that young man. By the way, Vanover also looked really good from the free throw line yesterday too. If that's something that Missouri can do better, if they can just draw more free throws as the good free throw shooting team that they are, I think suddenly that offense is going to look quite a bit better too. If anything, I think the easiest way to get free throws, I think we've seen so far in the 23-24 season, hey, just drive the ball as a perimeter player with reckless abandon. That means Sean East. First of all, I think East needs to be even more aggressive off the bounce than he's been so far. Hard to complain about Sean East's play so far offensively, right? He's been absolutely excellent, including yesterday, that 3-point shooting. My goodness, if I'm a type of player like, say, Marcus Allen, who's coming in for Missouri here next season as a high-level freshman, if I'm a prospect who basically has a lot to offer but needs to work on my shot a little bit, how do you not consider Missouri strongly? Because, well, it sure seems like they've made Sean East in just one season here, one offseason, into a really, really high-level 3-point shooter when last season he was well below average. Same thing with Kobe Brown last season, who never hit above 30% from downtown, hit about 45% last season. So I don't know what they're putting in the water over at Mizzou Arena these days, but clearly there's some kind of chemistry or formula that Dennis Gates and his staff have figured out when it comes to jump shooting. And yesterday, when the college football playoff Final Four was announced, had a lot of people online telling me to not be surprised if Florida State gets left out in the cold. Well, I got to admit, maybe I'm naive, but I'm surprised that Florida State got left out in the cold, and I agree with their athletic director's outrage in particular. So let's talk about that Florida State argument coming up, but first I want to tell you about FanDuel, because as the weather gets colder, the NFL offers stay hot on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, well, there's no better time to get in on the action. And quite honestly, if you're going to bet The money line on Missouri down to plus 118. Boy, you've lost a lot of value there, but I really think Missouri could be the favorite by kickoff come the Cotton Bowl. So whatever you're into, regardless, go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. That's FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Now, speaking of point spreads, Michigan and Alabama, 1.5. The Wolverines are favorites right now against the SEC champs. And I got to say, I was among the people who thought that the SEC should have been left out in the cold. I really couldn't believe I was saying it, but as it played out, it just felt like Georgia and Alabama didn't deserve to get in over an undefeated Washington, an undefeated Michigan, an undefeated Florida State, and also Texas, who had beaten Alabama, by the way, also a conference champ, the same one loss. That just made the logical sense to me, not how the committee saw it. And I got to say, I feel horrible for Florida State and Jordan Travis and their program. I really do. And, well, for all the people who say that the 12-team playoff would solve this problem next season, okay, sure, but there are no guarantees in football, as we've seen before. And Florida State's athletic director, Michael Alford, said today the committee changed the way success is assessed in college football. From a tangible metric, winning on the field, to an intangible, subjective one. Evidently, predicting the future matters more. They have become a committee of prognosticators. And that is completely and utterly correct. If you think that the committee got this right, then you have to be in favor of prognostication, essentially. The problem with all that, though, is this does really seem to be, I agree with Michael Alford, this is a change, because in the past, in fact, as recently as last season, you could argue that TCU was not among the top 4 teams. Again, if we're doing it based on point spreads, because it's inarguable that the reason I brought up the 1.5 point spread, well, if Michigan were playing Florida State, it'd probably be 10 points or more. So if you're saying, hey, we want better, more competitive football games, and basing it on point spreads, which generally are pretty darn accurate in terms of prognostication, aren't they? Well, then I guess you thought the committee got it right. To me, though, that's just, this whole thing is profoundly unfair and flies in the face of competition, because there is no other position on the field. If the Heisman Trophy winner for Florida State were a defensive end, for instance, or even a receiver, and he were the one who broke his leg instead of the quarterback, I just don't think they would have done this to Florida State. Again, we can all say that the quarterback's the most important position on the field, yada, yada, yada. That's all fine. And we can look at objectively, I suppose, the point spreads. But again, there is nothing truly objective about a forward-looking metric like that. The only truly objective thing we have is wins and losses. So that's where I'm going to agree with Michael Alford. I'm all for projections and numbers and all that good stuff. But as I've said many times, when it comes to the NCAA tournament field as well, I don't want prognostications and projections deciding who actually gets into the field of 68. That's just against the spirit of competition. And to me, what the committee did is against the spirit of competition. Again, even though I don't believe last season that TCU was among the 4 best teams in the country, and I think their utter destruction at the hands of Georgia in the college football playoff bared that out. But at the same time, just because of how the season played out, at 12-1 as the Big 12 champions, you looked at everybody else's resume, and guess what? There wasn't a way to really argue that TCU should have been that 4th team in the playoff. And again, we've seen this before, even the first year of the playoff. Alabama and Michigan State played in the first round. I'm pretty sure Bama was a 17-point favorite, something like that, going into that ball game. And indeed, Bama crushed the Spartans in that first-round matchup that really wasn't much of a matchup whatsoever. But indeed, Michigan State deserved to be there, and they deserved a chance to get their butts whipped. And part of sports is, yes, those occasional times when the underdog does pull the upset. And again, that's what this whole thing is supposed to be about, is deciding it on the field. And that's the most troubling thing about what's happened in this sport over the years is it's become so much more about figure skating and style points than it is about, again, as Michael Alford says, tangible results on the field. I really feel like the College Football Playoff Committee took it too far. And yes, while I think certainly Georgia, had they pulled out that victory against Alabama, a close victory, they would have been the number 1 overall seed, in my humble opinion, in that college football playoff, and deservedly so. But you know what? They had a chance to win their way in, and they lost. Those are the breaks. It's how it goes in the NCAA tournament sometimes. Sometimes the best team in the country loses in the Elite Eight. It happens on occasion. But you know what? At least everybody gets a chance who realistically deserves it in that sport. I just don't know how anybody can really defend this in terms of actual competition, leaving Florida State out. But regardless, thanks for not leaving Locked On Mizzou out of your podcast rotation today. Thanks for making it your first listen every day. And please feel free to tell a true son or daughter who hasn't heard about Locked On Mizzou yet that we are free and available on YouTube and wherever you get audio podcasts as well. So until next time, I'm John Miller, and thanks as always for listening to Locked On Mizzou.